I've started a new channel called Lunila Tales. Please subscribe and watch my best stories there. Link is in the description. The sky burned green and red like someone had set fire to the edges of the world. People pointed phones upward, laughing at first, because that is what humans do when they are seconds from disaster. They record it. Children squealed, dogs barked, car alarms screamed, and then the sound hit. A low humming that went straight through the chest, like the planet itself had developed a heartbeat. A woman dropped her coffee and whispered a prayer. A taxi driver climbed onto his roof to get a better view and then wished he hadn't. The ships were not beautiful in the way science fiction had promised. They looked like sharp stones pulled from the ocean, black and wet, hanging in the clouds like they were waiting for someone to dare them to fall. They didn't fire anything. No laser beams, no bombs. Instead, something invisible rolled out from them, spreading over the earth in a ripple no one could see but everyone felt. Guns clicked uselessly in military bases. Warplanes dropped from the sky like toys. Nuclear silos went dark, their deadly secrets sealed by hands that weren't human. The world watched its entire arsenal die in silence. It was as if someone had erased violence from the dictionary and left the whole planet tongue-tied. The message came then, in perfect translation on every screen, every radio, even carved into the clouds for people who didn't own either. A towering figure with skin like hammered metal and eyes that glowed yellow addressed humanity. He was dressed like an admiral from some alien navy opera, complete with epaulets made of light. His voice was calm but had the weight of thunder behind it. People of Earth, war ends now. Your weapons are no longer yours. Surrender your governments. Cooperate and you will live. Resist and you will still live, but less comfortably. It wasn't a threat. That was the part that scared everyone most. It was as if they were housebreaking a particularly rowdy species of pet. On the internet, conspiracy theorists exploded like popcorn. Some said it was the Second Coming. Others claimed it was the New World Order in alien drag. Most people just sat very still and waited for someone else to figure out whether to panic or not. The Admirals, as the creatures called themselves, set up command centers in the biggest cities. They didn't kill anyone. They didn't need to. They carried sleek rods at their hips, but no one ever saw them fire. When tanks rolled up to challenge them, the engines coughed once and died. When fighter jets screamed toward the ships, their controls froze midair, pilots cursing into useless radios as the aircraft glided down like paper planes. The world leaders met in a storm of panic. The United Nations had never agreed on lunch before. Now they were supposed to decide the fate of humanity. Some wanted to fight with whatever sticks and stones were left. Others suggested surrendering outright and hoping for good jobs in the new alien empire. A president from a small country suggested negotiating for at least one human holiday per year. No one laughed. That was when the cameras found him. Daniel Cross, 43, retired soldier, living in a cabin that didn't even have Wi-Fi. He was caught on live television walking straight into a Wrigley checkpoint in downtown Chicago carrying nothing but a plastic grocery bag. The alien guards, towering over him with armor that looked grown rather than made, demanded he stop. He didn't. One reached for the rod at his side. Daniel tilted his head like he was bored. A second later, the alien was on the ground, groaning in pain, his weaponless opponent standing over him looking faintly disappointed. The internet exploded. Some cheered. Some said it was fake. Others began betting on how long he had before the aliens turned him into space dust. The Admirals watched the footage in silence. Admiral Khyr, the one with eyes like dying suns, finally said, "One man? Unarmed? Is this rebellion?" Another admiral laughed. "It is theater. Humans love theater." Yet Khyr didn't laugh. He rewound the footage, watching Daniel move like a man who had fought all his life but didn't love it. That unsettled him. Meanwhile, Daniel bought a hot dog from a cart and told the terrified vendor to relax. "They haven't shot anyone yet, have they?" He bit into the hot dog and chewed thoughtfully as alien patrols closed in, weapons humming faintly with restrained power. He didn't seem impressed. The Admirals didn't understand this human at all. Every other soldier on the planet had thrown down their rifles in despair. Armies had disbanded in hours. Generals were seen crying on live television because their careers had ended with the push of some alien button. Yet here was a man who owned nothing more dangerous than a set of car keys, looking at the conquerors of Earth like they were door-to-door salesmen interrupting his weekend. Chwayar ordered surveillance on him immediately. Every movement, every word recorded. He expected fear. Instead, he saw Daniel helping an old woman carry groceries across a street guarded by alien soldiers. He saw him drinking coffee outside a diner as patrol ships screamed overhead. He saw him smile once, and for some reason that smile made Chwayar uneasy. "Daniel Cross," said Chwayar slowly, as if the name itself might reveal a weakness. "A man who fights with no weapons." He glanced at his fellow admirals, their faces unreadable beneath bone-white helmets. "Perhaps we have underestimated the species." No one spoke for a long time after that. Because even conquerors know this much about history. The moment you start fearing the man with nothing to lose, the war is already shifting in ways you cannot control. The world did not sleep that night. News channels replayed Daniel Cross knocking an alien soldier flat without firing a shot, without even raising his voice. Commentators argued about what it meant while online forums exploded with conspiracy theories claiming he was a secret super soldier, a time traveler, maybe even an alien himself sent to fight the invaders from within. The aliens didn't comment. They didn't have to. Their towering ships still hung in the sky like storm clouds that had decided to stay forever. In Washington, the president gathered what was left of the military brass, which wasn't much considering every weapon they had was now good for nothing but scrap metal. Generals who had once commanded nuclear arsenals sat in silence like schoolchildren scolded by a stern teacher. The Secretary of State suggested opening negotiations with the Riggery for Earth's partial sovereignty. "Maybe," he said carefully, "we can work out some sort of shared governance." The president stared at him, as if he had just suggested selling the planet on eBay. Meanwhile, Daniel Cross walked through Chicago like he owned it. Cameras followed him everywhere, though he didn't seem to care. A news crew caught up to him outside a diner where he was eating pancakes as if alien armadas hadn't just conquered Earth. One reporter shouted that the people wanted to know what his plan was. Daniel looked up, chewing slowly, and said, "Plan? I was just getting breakfast." Then he went back to his pancakes while the reporter stood there blinking. Admiral Chwayar watched all of this from the command center aboard the largest Riggery ship. He was not laughing anymore. To the Riggery, the conquest of Earth had been a demonstration of power, nothing more. They had swept aside humanity's weapons like someone clearing crumbs off a table. Yet here was a single unarmed man turning their victory into a joke. Chwayar called a council of admirals, their faces glowing in the blue light of the holoscreens. "This man must be studied," he said, his voice tight. One of the younger admirals sneered. "He is one human. A relic of a violent age now ended. Let him strut for his cameras." Chwayar didn't respond immediately. He watched the feed of Daniel walking through the alien checkpoint that afternoon. The soldiers had moved to block his path, but he kept walking like a man late for work. Two were on the ground before anyone realized what happened. It wasn't just the speed of it. It was the calm. No rage, no shouting. Just efficiency like folding laundry. That, Chwayar thought grimly, was not a man seeking fame. That was a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Daniel returned to his cabin that night to find someone waiting inside. She was Riggery but dressed in human clothes awkwardly, as if she had raided a thrift store without understanding what any of it meant. She introduced herself as Talri, a scientist assigned to study human biology. Her eyes glowed the same faint yellow as all Riggery, but there was something different in them, something restless. "They fear you," she said softly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. They have the biggest guns in the galaxy and they fear me? Tauri leaned forward. They have no guns now. That is the point. You fight without them. They do not understand this. Daniel poured himself a cup of coffee and considered this visitor, who might be either a spy or a traitor. Maybe both. And why are you telling me this? Because, she said after a long pause, not all of us agree with the Admirals. Some of us think conquering a planet just because we can makes us no better than the creatures we claim to civilize. Daniel studied her face. She didn't look like a soldier. She looked tired in the way scientists do when they have spent too many years watching people in power break things they cannot fix. She handed him a small device the size of a coin. Put this in the open where they can see it. They will think it is a weapon. It is not. It only records. But it will make them nervous. When she left, Daniel stood there a long time turning the coin-shaped device over in his hand. He didn't know whether to trust her. But he liked the idea of making the Admirals nervous. The next day he walked straight into another alien checkpoint and placed the coin on the hood of a Riggery patrol vehicle. The soldiers aimed their rods immediately, voices sharp in their own language. Daniel sat down on the curb next to the coin and began peeling an orange. Cameras caught every second of it. Within the hour, Admiral Chwire himself demanded to speak with him. The message appeared on every screen in Chicago. Come to the command center. Alone. People begged him not to go. They said it was a trap. Daniel shrugged. Maybe it was. He went anyway. The Riggery Command Center was a towering structure of black metal grown directly out of the ground by alien technology. Inside it smelled of ozone and something faintly sweet, like overripe fruit. Admiral Chwire waited at the far end of a hall lined with alien soldiers whose weapons pulsed faintly as if eager to fire. You enjoy making trouble, Chwire said when Daniel approached. Daniel looked around at the alien banners, the soldiers, the weapons that supposedly did not kill but hummed menacingly nonetheless. I enjoy breakfast, he said finally. Trouble just keeps finding me afterward. Chwire's eyes narrowed. You mock us. Daniel shrugged. If the shoe fits. For the first time since arriving on Earth, the great Admiral Chwire seemed unsure of himself. His victory over humanity had been absolute, flawless, but it had taken only one man with no weapons at all to turn that victory into something that felt less like conquest and more like a punchline. Chwire leaned closer until those burning yellow eyes were inches from Daniel's. What do you want? Daniel smiled faintly. For you to leave. The Admiral expected threats or demands or at least fear. He got none of them. That unsettled him more than any army ever had. Later that night, as Chwire replayed the conversation again and again, something strange began to happen among the Riggery soldiers. Whispers spread through the ranks about the human who fought without weapons, who faced their leader without flinching. Some called him reckless. Others began calling him something far more dangerous. They began calling him hope. Rain fell on the third day after the alien conquest, as though the planet itself was trying to wash away the humiliation of surrender. Yet something had changed since Daniel Cross had walked into that command center and left alive. People whispered in cafes, on street corners, in subway tunnels, about the man who faced the invaders without so much as a pocket knife and came back smirking. The story spread faster than any news broadcast, gaining details that may or may not have been true. Some said he had humiliated Admiral Chwire in front of his soldiers. Others claimed he had stolen alien secrets while drinking their coffee. None of it mattered. What mattered was that people were beginning to feel something they had not felt since the ships arrived. They were beginning to feel hope. In the countryside it started small. A farmer in Iowa refused to let alien soldiers take his tractor for their mysterious experiments, so he set a beehive on top of it instead. When the soldiers reached for the tractor, the bees swarmed, sending the creatures stumbling backward as the farmer leaned on his fence laughing. Someone filmed it. Within hours the video was everywhere. The aliens, conquerors of Earth, undone by honeybees. In New York, a group of teenagers hacked into an alien communication relay using nothing but old laptops and a library Wi-Fi signal. They replaced the Riggery victory anthem with pop music at full volume. Admiral Chwire himself nearly crushed the control console when his command center filled with the sound of a boy band singing about broken hearts. None of these acts harmed the Riggery in any serious way. Their technology remained invincible, their weapons unmatched. Yet each prank chipped away at the illusion of absolute control. People began chalking graffiti on walls, slogans like "Earth fights back" and "The man with empty hands was here." Daniel watched all this with a faint smile but also a growing sense of unease. He had not asked to become the face of resistance. He was a man who wanted quiet mornings and strong coffee, not revolutions. Yet wherever he went people treated him like some sort of legend. Old women pressed sandwiches into his hands. Children followed him through the streets, shouting his name. A street musician wrote a song about him called "The Fist That Shook the Stars." Daniel told him the title was ridiculous. The musician played it anyway. Meanwhile, deep in their ships the admirals argued among themselves. One faction insisted the humans were nothing more than unruly livestock needing a firmer hand. Another warned that suppressing them too brutally would only make things worse. And then there was the uncomfortable fact that some of their own soldiers had begun carving human resistance slogans into the walls of their barrack. Admiral Chwire silenced them all with a single sentence. "We promised this would be bloodless," he said. "Now the blood is beginning to stir." It was true. The Riggery had prided themselves on conquering without slaughter. To them it proved their superiority, as though killing was something only lesser species required. But now their restraint looked like weakness. Humans mocked them openly in the street. Children threw eggs at their patrol vehicles. A man in Paris dumped a bucket of paint over a Riggery officer's helmet while tourists cheered. Through all of this Daniel kept moving. He freed an entire city one night without firing a shot. The aliens had set up energy barriers around the perimeter of Cleveland, claiming it was for the city's own security. No one was allowed in or out without permission. Daniel walked the perimeter for 3 days studying the patterns of the guards, the timing of their patrol drones, the placement of their relay towers. Then, in the middle of a thunderstorm, he led a column of civilians straight through the defenses using nothing but timing, misdirection, and a few well-thrown smoke bombs made from kitchen ingredients. By dawn the barriers were down, the aliens humiliated, the city cheering. News of the victory reached every corner of the planet. The Riggery commanders fumed behind closed doors. "One man," they muttered, "one man making us look like fools." That night Tauri returned to Daniel's hideout. Her alien eyes glowed faintly in the darkness as she handed him a data chip. "This," she whispered, "is what they fear you will discover." Daniel slid the chip into the battered laptop he carried. Schematics bloomed on the cracked screen, alien symbols translating slowly into human language. It was not a weapon design. It was biology. The Riggery anatomy rendered in cold detail, including one glaring vulnerability marked in red. Daniel leaned back. "They are allergic?" Tauri nodded. "To a protein found in many earth plants. They process it as poison. Too much exposure shuts down their nervous system." Daniel stared at the screen. The conquerors of Earth taken down not by missiles or bombs but by something growing in every other field on the planet. "You tell me this why?" he asked. "Because," Tauri said quietly, "they will destroy your planet to hide this secret if they must. Better you use it before they do." Daniel closed the laptop slowly. He did not like what this meant. He wanted the Riggery gone, yes, but turning the entire planet into a weapon felt like crossing a line even he had hoped to avoid. Still, he tucked the data chip into his pocket because wars, even the ones you never wanted, rarely asked for permission before arriving at your door. The next morning a Riggery patrol caught Tauri outside the city. Witnesses said she didn't resist as they dragged her toward a transport ship. By afternoon the screens across every human city lit up with her execution broadcast live from orbit. No words, no explanation, just the image of her body falling still under the cold lights of alien justice. Daniel watched from a crowded bar. No one spoke for a long time after the transmission ended. Then someone whispered, "They killed her because of you." Maybe they had. Maybe they had done it because she betrayed them, or maybe because they wanted to bait him into action. Either way, Daniel felt the war shift inside him at that moment, hard and final. The man who had fought without weapons began planning something far more dangerous than tricks or protests. Because now it was not about breakfast or graffiti or humiliating admirals on camera. Now it was about ending this before more bodies hit the ground. The invitation came the next morning, delivered through every screen in every city, translated into every human language. Admiral Hyr himself appeared, his face carved from cold metal and pride, eyes burning like dying suns. He addressed the world, but the words were for one man. Daniel Cross, you will come to us in peace. We will speak as leaders do. Alone. Everyone saw it for what it was. A trap as bright as a flare in the night sky. Yet Daniel went anyway. Not because he trusted them, but because he understood that refusing would make him look like he feared them. And fear was the one thing he could not afford to show. The Riggery prepared the stage with theatrical precision. The meeting took place in a massive dome at the heart of their primary base, a structure grown from alien alloys that shimmered faintly as though breathing. Cameras from every corner of Earth were connected to the feed. Humanity would watch what happened next in real time. Daniel entered alone as ordered. No weapons, no armor, nothing but the same weathered jacket and the calm walk that had already become legend. Across the chamber the admirals stood in a semicircle, their armor glinting under cold white lights. At the center waited Hyr on a raised platform like a throne carved from lightning itself. Daniel stopped several paces away. "You wanted to talk," he said. "Talk." Hyr's voice rolled across the chamber like distant thunder. "You provoke rebellion among your people. You humiliate my soldiers. You spread chaos where we promised order." Daniel shrugged. "Maybe people do not like being conquered. You mock us even now," Hyr said, but there was a tremor of something under the words. Anger or maybe unease. One of the other admirals leaned forward. "Surrender the resistance, and we will grant you mercy." Daniel smiled faintly, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Funny thing about mercy. It usually shows up before the executions start. The chamber went silent except for the faint hum of alien machinery. Hyr's eyes narrowed as he studied the man before him. No fear. No trembling. Just a stubborn calm that made even the armed soldiers uneasy. Then Daniel did something none of them expected. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small device no bigger than a coin. Tauri's recorder, the one she had given him before she died. He set it on the floor between them and tapped a button. Hyr stiffened. "What is that?" Daniel looked straight at the cameras broadcasting across the planet. "This little thing? It records everything. Every word, every threat, every promise. The whole world is listening." For the first time since arriving on Earth, the admirals shifted uncomfortably. Their entire strategy had depended on controlling the story, shaping the narrative of conquest as peaceful and inevitable. Now every word would be public. Every insult, every order, every threat. Hyr tried to recover. "Let them hear. Let them witness your defiance crumble." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Or your pride." The next part happened so fast many viewers later argued about whether it had been planned. Daniel triggered another setting on the device. The chamber translator, wired into every Riggery system for the broadcast, suddenly glitched. Alien words twisted into human phrases at random. Hyr opened his mouth to speak and the translation boomed across Earth in perfect English. "I am the supreme chicken of Riggery. Bow before my magnificent feathers." For one stunned second no one moved. Then laughter erupted from every human watching across the planet. In cafes, in streets, in secret resistance bunkers, people howled until tears ran down their faces. The alien soldiers looked at each other in confusion as Khyr shouted furiously, only for the translator to announce proudly that he was also the Empress of Underpants and would destroy all turnips before sundown. Daniel stood there calm as ever while the Admirals scrambled to shut down the feed. By the time they cut the transmission, it was too late. The damage was done. The galaxy itself would be laughing before the day ended. Khyr's voice dropped to something cold enough to freeze bone. You think this is war? It is not. It is extermination postponed only by our mercy. Daniel met his gaze. Then maybe you should stop underestimating the people you tried to conquer. Khyr raised one hand, and for a moment Daniel thought the order to kill him would come then and there. But the Admiral hesitated. Killing him now would make him a martyr. Leaving him alive made him a joke. Khyr could not decide which fate was worse for the Empire's image. Daniel turned his back on them and walked out before they reached a decision. No one stopped him. No one moved. Even the alien guards seemed frozen by the audacity of it. Outside the dome, crowds of humans erupted into cheers when he appeared. The legend of the man with empty hands grew tenfold in that moment. Not only had he faced the conquerors again without fear, he had turned them into the punchline of the century. Across the planet, rebellion surged like wildfire. People who had hidden in basements now painted slogans on walls in broad daylight. Farmers sprayed water hoses at Riggery patrols. Hackers flooded alien broadcasts with images of chickens wearing Admiral hats. But amid the laughter came something darker. That evening the Riggery executed a dozen captured resistance fighters in the main square of Paris. No trial, no explanation, just a brutal message burned into the air for everyone to see. Daniel watched the footage with his jaw tight. He understood now that Khyr's pride had cracked. A wounded predator was always more dangerous than a hungry one. Inside the alien command ships, tension spread among the admirals. Some argued for immediate extermination of the human population. Others warned that such an action would spark rebellion across other conquered worlds watching the situation closely. The Riggery Empire relied on the illusion of control. Lose it here and they might lose it everywhere. Among the soldiers, whispers grew louder. Some had begun to question the admirals openly. Why fear one unarmed human so much? Why execute prisoners if conquest was already complete? Questions that had no good answers. Daniel met with resistance leaders in secret that night. He shared Talri's discovery about the Riggery biological weakness. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them like ash. They could turn half the planet into a weapon if they chose. They could kill the invaders by the thousands. But doing so might also doom any chance of peace. Daniel sat alone long after the others left, staring at the tiny recording device on the table. He had humiliated the admirals, yes. He had given people hope. But he could feel the tide shifting toward something far more dangerous than jokes or protests. Because now the Riggery knew he was not simply a nuisance. He was becoming a threat. And threats, Daniel knew, were answered with fire. Night fell over the city like a warning. Alien ships hung in the clouds, pulsing faint blue light, scanning for any sign of rebellion. Streets were empty except for patrols marching in rigid lines, their armor gleaming wet under street lamp. The executions in Paris had chilled the world, yet instead of crushing defiance it only sharpened it. Across the planet resistance groups were organizing with a speed that startled even themselves. People who had never so much as shouted at a traffic cop were now plotting against the most advanced empire in the galaxy. And at the center of it all was a man with no weapons and no army, only a plan so reckless it might actually work. Daniel Cross had spent the day studying blueprints stolen from the Riggery by sympathetic workers forced to build alien supply depots. He now knew where the flagship was anchored above Earth, how its patrol schedules worked, and which docking stations handled transport between orbit and ground. What he didn't know was whether the soldiers guarding it would hesitate to kill him the second he set foot inside. He doubted they would. In the basement of an abandoned library, the resistance gathered around a single bare bulb. Men and women with tired eyes and clenched jaws leaned close as Daniel traced lines on a map with one finger. He explained how they would hijack a supply transport, slip aboard the flagship disguised as workers, and reach the central command deck without firing a shot. The goal was simple: get Kachwar, end the occupation by cutting off the head before the Empire decided to burn Earth down out of spite. Someone asked the question everyone feared. What if the ship detects us before we reach the deck? Daniel didn't look up from the map. Then we improvised. The room went quiet. Improvisation sounded a lot like dying. But no one suggested abandoning the plan. The Riggery had left them nothing else. When the transport arrived before dawn, it looked ordinary enough, a bulky craft loaded with mineral containers bound for orbit. The Resistance fighters wore stolen maintenance uniforms, faces smeared with grime to hide the tension in their eyes. Daniel climbed aboard last, carrying nothing but a toolbox filled with wires, scraps of metal, and 3 homemade smoke bombs disguised as thermos flasks. The ship lifted smoothly into the sky, breaking through low clouds into the waiting shadow of the flagship above. It was larger than any human city, a floating fortress of black metal shaped like a blade pointed at the stars. Docking clamps closed around the transport with a clang that echoed in every chest. Inside the docking bay, Riggery guards checked cargo crates, while drones scanned for explosives or weapons. The disguised humans moved carefully, unloading containers under the unblinking stare of soldiers who had no idea Earth's most wanted man was 10 feet away pretending to struggle with a wrench. Daniel watched patrol patterns while keeping his movements casual. He counted seconds between each drone sweep, noted which guards looked bored, which looked alert. Every soldier in the bay carried a weapon capable of vaporizing steel in seconds. Daniel's side carried nothing but wrenches and nerves stretched thin as piano wire. When the moment came, it came fast. A pair of drones drifted left on their sweep, leaving a blind corner for exactly 4 seconds. Daniel dropped his wrench, crossed the floor in 3 long strides, and slid through a maintenance hatch followed by 6 Resistance fighters carrying tool crates that were definitely not filled with tools. The corridor beyond hummed with the throb of engines buried deep inside the ship's skeleton. Alien lights cast everything in silver and blue. The group moved quickly, guided by blueprints memorized until they could walk them blindfolded. Twice they ducked into alcoves as patrols passed. Once they froze while a Riggery officer paused only a few feet away before moving on, unaware that the man he hunted was holding his breath behind a wall panel thin enough to punch through. They reached the central lift without raising alarms. Above them waited the command deck, where Kachwar and his fellow admirals directed the entire occupation. Below them waited open space ready to swallow anyone unlucky enough to be caught. The lift carried them upward in tense silence. Resistance fighters gripped their fake toolboxes like lifelines. Daniel stared at the glowing numbers ticking toward the top deck, knowing each one could be the last he ever saw. When the doors opened, the group spilled into a hallway lined with towering windows revealing Earth far below, a swirl of clouds and blue oceans turning slowly under alien control. At the far end, double doors guarded by 2 soldiers led to the command chamber. Daniel walked forward alone. The guards crossed their weapons, blocking his path. "Tell Kachwar," Daniel said calmly, "that the man he cannot kill has come to talk." One guard activated a comm link on his wrist. Seconds later, the doors slid open with a hiss. The command chamber looked like the bridge of some ancient cathedral fused with a war machine. Holographic maps floated above consoles. Stars burned beyond massive viewports. At the center stood Admiral Kachwar in armor polished until it shone like ice. "You," Kachwar said softly, as though unsure whether to be furious or impressed. "Me," Daniel agreed. Soldiers moved to surround him, but Kachwar raised one hand, stopping them. He studied the unarmed human who had become the Empire's greatest nuisance. "You could have stayed on your planet, lived out your brief life in peace. Instead you come here. Why?" Daniel met his gaze. "Because you killed Talri. Because you keep killing anyone who stands in your way." Because you think conquest makes you gods when it only makes you cowards hiding behind machines. Murmurs rippled through the officers around the chamber. No one spoke to an admiral like that. Quechua's expression hardened. You think words win wars? No, Daniel said. People do. As if on cue, the smoke bombs hidden in toolboxes erupted throughout the lower decks, triggered by timers Daniel had set before entering the chamber. Thick gray clouds filled corridors across the ship, blinding drones, scattering soldiers, jamming sensors. Resistance fighters moved through chaos, planting transmitters that hijacked the ship's communication system. Quechua spun toward his officers, shouting orders, but the main view screen flickered, and then Daniel's voice boomed through every deck of the flagship, every occupied city on Earth, every colony ship watching from orbit. He revealed the secret Talri had died for, the protein vulnerability buried in Riggery biology, the weakness they had tried to hide even from their own soldiers. On half the deck, soldiers froze, hearing that their invincible leaders could be killed by plants growing in roadside ditches. On others, fights broke out between loyalists and those suddenly questioning why they served an empire built on lies. Quechua roared for order, but the sound was swallowed by alarms as half his ship slipped into mutiny. Daniel looked around the chaos he had unleashed without firing a single shot. You wanted war, he told Quechua quietly. Now it is yours to lose. The command deck shook as alarms howled through the flagship. Red lights flashed across alien consoles while officers shouted in their own language, some demanding loyalty to the admirals, others throwing down weapons and refusing to fight at all. Daniel stood calm at the center of the chaos, unarmed, watching the Riggery Empire fracture in real time. Quechua tried to rally his officers, bellowing orders above the sirens, but even the soldiers closest to him hesitated now that the secret was out. Their invincible leaders, their unstoppable weapons, all undone by a protein growing wild across Earth like weeds in an abandoned lot. Daniel stepped closer to Quechua as the room trembled under the sound of distant explosions. Those will be your own men fighting each other, he said. They know the truth now. The empire that cannot be killed can be poisoned by breakfast cereal. How long before the colonies here? How long before your soldiers decide they would rather serve someone who tells them the truth? Quechua turned slowly, armor glowing under the flickering lights. His voice dropped to something low and dangerous. You think you have won, human? You think this ends with you walking free? Daniel shook his head. No. It ends with you leaving. The admirals, still loyal to Quechua, moved to surround Daniel, weapons drawn, but the mutiny spreading through the ship reached the command deck before they could act. A blast door crashed open and Riggery soldiers stormed in, some wearing imperial colors, others carrying the banners of rebel colonies long crushed by the Empire. One officer shouted that the fleet had broken into civil war. Entire squadrons were refusing orders, ships turning on each other in orbit as Earth's population watched from below. Quechua looked around the chamber at the chaos unraveling everything he had built. His empire had ruled 100 worlds for centuries, but now the infection of doubt spread faster than any weapon. It started with a single unarmed man, and now it threatened to devour everything. Daniel raised his voice above the alarms so that soldiers on both sides could hear. Leave Earth. Take your war with you. Or stay and watch your empire die here. For a long moment no one moved. Quechua's soldiers looked at him, waiting for the order to open fire. The rebels waited for any excuse to finish what they had started. Then Admiral Quechua, conqueror of worlds, slowly lowered his weapon. His voice when it came was flat with fury. We are leaving this cursed planet. The rebel soldiers let them go, not out of mercy but because their war was no longer about Earth. It was spreading outward now, across fleets and colonies, across every world that had suffered under Riggery control. Within hours the occupation collapsed. Alien ships lifted from cities across Earth, engines screaming as they punched through the atmosphere toward orbit. The sky filled with streaks of fire as vessels once united under Quechua's command turned on each other above the planet. People poured into the streets cheering while fragments of the Riggery Empire burned against the edge of space like falling stars. Daniel watched it all from a hill outside the city. He had not given a victory speech or taken command of anything. He simply stood with his hands in his pockets as the invaders fled the world they had claimed without firing a shot. KHYR's flagship was the last to leave, battered from internal mutiny but still holding formation as though pride alone kept its hull from falling apart. Before it left orbit, a final transmission reached every screen on Earth. KHYR appeared one last time, armor dented, eyes still burning even in defeat. "Human," he said, "we leave you this planet because it is broken and not worth the ash it would cost to hold it. But know this. Others watched what happened here. They are not as patient as we were." The transmission ended before anyone could reply. Moments later the flagship vanished into the dark between stars, leaving behind a planet full of stunned silence. In the days that followed, Earth discovered its weapons still did not work. The Riggery had taken that power from humanity and left nothing behind but broken circuits and dead machinery. At first governments panicked, demanding their arsenals back, but gradually the fear faded as people realized the world had never been so quiet. No wars, no bombs, no missiles waiting under mountains for the next argument between nations. Daniel walked through cities free of alien patrols and saw children playing in streets where tanks once stood. He saw murals of the battles painted on walls, some depicting him as a giant knocking ships from the sky with his bare hands despite the fact he had never fired a single shot. He told a painter once to make the drawings smaller, more honest. The painter laughed and said heroes never get to choose their own size. One evening resistance leaders gathered in what had once been the alien command dome. They offered Daniel a position among them, a seat at whatever new government rose from the ruins. He refused before they finished the sentence. He had no interest in ruling anyone. He wanted coffee, quiet mornings, maybe a fishing trip if the rivers ever ran clear again. But peace never stays simple for long. A week after the Riggery left, deep space telescopes picked up movement far beyond the solar system. Dozens of ships from regions no one recognized, watching the edges of Earth like wolves circling a wounded animal. Daniel read the reports in a small diner over black coffee. The waitress asked if it was true the aliens might come back. Daniel folded the papers carefully and said maybe not them. Maybe others. That night a transmission crackled through the old alien relays the Riggery had left behind. A voice speaking in no human language but translated automatically by systems no one fully understood. The message was simple. "We saw what happened to the Riggery. We are coming." People panicked at first until someone asked Daniel what humanity should do. He looked at the sky for a long time before answering. Let them come. Because the man who had defeated an empire without a single weapon understood something no invader ever had. Earth was never conquered by machines or fleets or soldiers. It was only ever lost when people gave up. And now, after everything, no one on the planet seemed ready to surrender again.